The first one was, it's very interesting question, can we live without gas and coal? And the answer is, of course, yes. And all the member states said yes, but the yes is on the long term, which means that by 2050, what was very nice from the European Commission or European Union countries is that we agree on this. All of the member states said that that is possible and we should do that. That's a target which we suddenly we agreed on. The question is that what can you do in the middle term and in the short term? And that's a more risky and more, let's say, more compounded question in that sense, that in the short term, it's very difficult to think how can we do this transition in a way that we reach the 2050 target as fast as possible. If you just consider the Hungarian example, more than 65% of the households are heated by gas now. So either individually or through district heating one. This is an investment, if you consider from household point of view, they may maybe 4 long-term investment, and one of them is the heating equipment. You don't do it you cannot change from one year to another. However, you can do things to make these changes rapidly. So this is a very important balance which you have to follow in this way, that the answer is yes. The question and no, this is an opportunity that we can make this transition faster. We are looking at questions, and the governments are looking at questions, what will happen in the next year, I mean this winter and the next winter, which is quite important question. That's a short term. And then what you can do and what is a must actually is that you have to do energy savings. And whenever we answer the questions which you pose, that's the first answer always, is that the energy which you don't consume is the best energy. You should not forget about this. And just to give you in prospect, in Hungary, if we consume, for example, the households consume 260 petajoule, just remember 260. 180 is mainly for heating. If we would have building stock on a quality which the EU would say that that's a quality, we can reduce it to 1/4 of the consumption. Huge amount of energy which you can save. You cannot do it in 1 or 2 years, but you can start to speed it up. And we started to speed it up. We are starting from a position which is a very bad situation. So our energy efficiency in building is at very low level. In spite, a lot of money was put in this in the last year, but we further have to improve this. And why I'm telling this is an opportunity, because of the prices, it's not only the governmental money and governmental policies, but households, private investors, we realize that that's the way forward. So that's the first thing which we have to do. In the midterm, what is important, and even in the short term, is the answer is that first, it might not be that we get rid of all of the gas, but what we have to do, diversification. So all the governments realize, I think Hungarian government realizes that depending on one source is not sustainable, not in economic sense, not in other sense as well. And there are, of course, steps which you can do. Hungary as a landlocked country is quite in a difficult situation because we cannot have the LNG terminal, so we depend on other countries. And that's already a signal that you have to cooperate with the others, because to get these LNG type of investment and to get the gas from there, you need to maintain this cooperation, which is there actually. The closest one in Croatia, and then there you see that all the initiatives in this direction goes as well. What is important to see, and I agree fully with Matthias in that sense, that you should not over-invest in this type of development, because what is an important message for the energy sector is that investments are not made for 5 years or 10 years. So whenever you make such a huge investment like LNG terminals or transit routes, that's not for 4 or 5 years. So if you overdo it and you do invest a lot in this, then you can forget about short-term interest, because if you have a look at what happens with the gas prices, suddenly today, what you have seen that from the 300 and 200 euro level per megawatt hour, it suddenly went down to 100 euro level. So the message is that don't make over investment in the gas, because there might be a lock-in effect in that sense, that if you do again a lot of investment here, it might be economically rational, and companies and households make rational decisions to stay longer than necessary in this field. So that's a very key message, is that these investments and decisions what you make when you make the energy strategies, that The long term has impact on the short term decisions as well. So you have to plan your investment in that sense that you will fulfill this. And maybe just one more thought on this, whether we can live without fossil energies, that if you have a look at the International Energy Agency and other big institutions development globally, what you should see that between 20 to 25, so in the next 2-3 years, you have to see this drop in the emissions in CO2, the emissions globally, which means that in the next 2-3 years, you would need to have this top in the emissions. And from that on, if you take seriously the 1.5 degree, we have to reduce it. What we see now is because of the very short-term decisions like keeping the coal-fired plant alive, this might even have a further implication that this top will be there only, let's hope only for 1 or 2 years more, but it will be even more higher challenge later on, because then it would mean that what you might have to do is that you have to reduce your emissions further than what you have thought before. And the big solutions are there, commercially feasible, viable. The first one, I would say, and it might be surprised, energy efficiency should be the first, and the second, renewables. So renewables is a really nice options to do, and then Hungary might have been a latecomer in that sense. So we started to increase our photovoltaic portfolio quite lately. But if you have a look at the last 3 years development, it was really very rapid one. Impressive one. We should keep these dynamics in Hungary and in Europe as well, because if we are on that track, we can fulfill our mid and long-term requirement. One more message there, that you should somehow diversify as well there. So having only photovoltaic in the system makes you very exposed to price trends that in the peak hours when you are producing it, it will be not the nicest one. So you really have to diversify, think of other solutions like wind, biomass, and geothermal, which we have a big potential there. And what is important that we see that storage is an important question in the short and the long term one. For short term, we see the solution. So hydrogen storage, hydro storages and battery storages would help in the short term, but that would not help in the seasonal storages. That's an important challenge. On the hydrogen, we are even facing more problems than you would think of, because if you consider that what happens with the hydrogen storage and hydrogen production, then you would have a system with lots of transformation. You just have to consider this, that what happens if you produce it from, for example, for solar energy or from wind energy, then you have a transformation with big losses, 20-30% of losses to then you have transfer this hydrogen as well. Still again few percentage losses as well, and you don't use the hydrogen in its form, but you have to turn it to energy. So that's another loss in the system. So you have to really consider as well that hydrogen can be a solution. It is, but there are certain barriers which we have to overcome in the next decade as well. So we have to deal with really big challenges in that sense. And I think with the first two questions, I have some answer to that. And there was a third question on the circular economy and raw material ones. That's even more challenging than what we see. Because when we think of all these solutions like battery, renewables, it will use materials which we haven't used at that scale we have used before, and then it's a huge challenge for us. Thinking in economic terms, what happens now that these materials are really pricey, very expensive one, and economics would help in a sense, but we have to change our habit as well, I think, in that sense. So it might not be the price signal is there, but it might not be sufficient. So, and you can start it at home, because what does it mean? Recycling, waste recycling, using materials which you do not have to use, that is an important thing. Consider if you are going on travel that what is the mean where you can be more sustainable in that sense. So these are the issues which household people have to start, companies have to start, and of course policies from governments have to initiate that it will go to the good direction. Sorry, I was a bit longer, but I thought it must be answered in that.